Welcome to A Delhi Love, Ishq Mohabbat Pyar, the podcast that treats Delhiwalas to captivating conversations on living and loving all things Delhi. Delhi is not just a place, it's a state of mind, an attitude that leaves a mark on everyone who visits or calls it home. I'm Yasmin Kidwai, your host, a documentary filmmaker, former municipal councillor, and at heart, the quintessential Delhi girl. I love how Delhi is both old and new at the same time. I value its history and heritage and love exploring the new aspects of the city we share. I'm no expert, but I grew up in the gullies here, enjoyed public service here, and just like you, shared a deep passion for Delhi's enigmatic soul. Together, let's embrace the delightful contradictions that make Delhi the city it is. After all, around every corner, there must be 1,000 dastans to share in this megacity of a million conversations. We often speak to people from Delhi who represent a unique side of the experience of living and loving Delhi and Delhiites. Delhi is known to be loud and very in your face, but there are some individuals who show us that you can be heard even if you don't make noise. Today we are meeting one such individual who is known for standing with and for our country's least visible populations. We will talk about his motivations and inspirations and how a just, more equitable society is possible for all. Can the world be more compassionate and inclusive with individual efforts and community involvement? Can one make a difference even if one is not the loudest voice in the room? Dr. Mander is a renowned Indian writer and human rights activist, peace worker, columnist, researcher and teacher. He is often associated with giving voice to the most marginalized and vulnerable populations in the country, including survivors of mass violence, religious minorities, and homeless children. A believer in the country's collective conscience, Dr. Mander tries to foster healing, promote goodwill, and build trust between communities through compassion and radical love. He is recognized for his courageous personal stance and has won several awards for his peace work. Welcome, Dr. Mander.
In the IS Academy, where I taught for 3 years, I would say that all through your career, you're going to be told it's your duty to obey. That's not. Gandhiji had said, when you are in doubt, think of the most vulnerable person you've ever known. 60 million tons means that if you put the bags in a line, you can go from the earth to the moon and go around 2 or 3 times. That much grain. The Berlin Wall fell, and it became as if the idea of justice and equality. The Babri Masjid fell, and the idea of secular India sort of crumbled. The top 1% owns 40% of the country's wealth. Films may not be realistic by any standard, but they are a realistic depiction of popular consciousness. My expectation from young people is not that all of them will either speak out from the tongue or from the hands, with their hands, but every single person should respond from their hearts.
Welcome, Dr. Mander. So tell me, what are you first, a writer, a columnist, an activist, teacher? What identity is the default identity?
That's a really tough one. But thank you for inviting me. Because I do all of these together. So probably my closest is the work I directly do with people in very difficult circumstances. So survivors of hate violence, homeless people living with hunger and discrimination. But simultaneously, then I like to think about policy, law. I like to think about human stories, so the telling of their stories, so they never, oppressed people are not just statistics or a problem to be solved. They're people just like you and me. So I actually started writing most of all to humanize the people we never see. So the writing and then the teaching and speaking about these. So all of these are tied together.
Yeah. Also, you, just to go back a little bit to the beginning, you studied at St. Stephen's and thereafter the Delhi School of Economics, the D School. I think you were studying sociology.
Yes.
And you were apparently very unhappy, and then you went off to the Barefoot College at Telonia with Bunker Roy. And and then apparently I think you also went on a Bharat Darshan. So what was the push? We share something in two things in common with it. I've also studied sociology, and I was also very unhappy. I think sociology doesn't make you search out things. I've also made a film on the Barefoot College. So I've spent a lot of time there.
So when I was in St. Stephen's, it was a lovely time. I mean, it was a very elite college, but it was also a time, I think, where young people believed that a better world was possible and that we would be part of making it happen. I think young people today, we've deprived them of those dreams and hopes. So college was a beautiful space for me, and all of these years later, I still have very close friendships with many people who are in different walks of public life now. I went to D school hoping that I'd understand more about Indian society, and because I wanted to be able to understand and make a difference. I found the way the courses were structured very formalistic, and I wasn't learning what I wanted to learn, and so I took a big leap. It was and it became 4 years of my life where and my parents naturally were anxious, but they let me go. Where I started off with Telonia. I spent, I think, 6 months there, and then Telonia was a wonderful step of learning, but it was still within my comfort zone, because it was, a lot of the people were from the same kind of social background that we have, and so it was a protected space, which was lovely, but I wanted to go beyond it. And so for the next 3 or 4 years, largely I just went across rural India. I stayed in a lot of the Gandhian ashrams, and would travel, take a lift on a truck. It was my discovery of India, and I learnt a lot. I'm really glad I learnt so much.
So, were you aimless, or was there a search for something that was?
No, absolutely not aimless. I wanted to understand my country so I could decide.
And very consciously, you were like, I want to understand India.
Absolutely it was. I see. I'm from a partition family. My parents were uprooted from what is now in Pakistan, and I'm grateful that my parents I never heard hate and bigotry from them. But it was a protected upbringing. I was, in boarding schools, and my father moved many interesting places. He was in what is now Arunachal. So my early childhood was, my father was the one who brought the Dalai Lama across from the border in 1959.
So he was a part of.
He was also in the administration. Yeah.
Okay.
And he was the district head of Bomdila, which was the district from where, and the Dalai Lama was the first home he stayed in India was with my parents, and so I had an interesting childhood. My father was in Sikkim, in the Andaman Nicobar Islands, and so on. But I felt I didn't know and understand what the life of millions of my countrymen and women is, and I wanted to learn. I wanted to understand. I was very clear I wanted to make a difference to their lives, and so I wanted to see what I should do after I knew my people. So it was really that journey that I set out on, and my decision at the end of it to join the IAS was a very conscious decision, because I could make out how important the state was in the lives of people of disadvantage, and how much one could do. And so it was that choice which led me to, after about 4 years, to actually sit for the IAS exam.
But then you gave it up for social activism, which really can't compare. Why did you do that?
It's a long journey. I loved my years in the IAS.
How many years did you
I
spend there?
spent about 17, 18 years, of which 3 years were also as a teacher in the IAS Academy in Missouri. But I spent the rest of my time intensely in districts of Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. Um, I I would not substitute. I mean, what I learned in the 4 years before I entered the IAS and in the years, you- um, I found I mean, and it was also a turbulent time. The 1984 Sikh riots, and I was in Indore, and through 1989 when the movement for the Babri Masjid started, India transformed before my eyes. So handling riots, handling communal violence, the Narmada uh, agitation with Baba Hamte and Medha Patkar also was in my district. So engaging with all of this, um, I learned a lot. I did what I made one decision that I would only do what my conscience tells me, and I would not think about consequences. And I had the space. I did what I did. I frequently defied public authority, but I survived to tell the story and went on. Um, uh, but 2002, I had actually, at that time you were allowed to take a sabbatical to work with an NGO. So I was on a sabbatical. In that, with that freedom, I had gone when I heard about the Gujarat violence in 2002. I had gone just to work as a volunteer in the camps, relief camps. But within a very short time, because when I spoke to people there, and having been a civil servant, I've handled many riots in this very troubled period of our history. I realized very quickly that this was not a riot. This was a state-sponsored massacre. And then, and I first said, I have to say this to the world. And I wrote a very anguished piece which I'd called "Cry, My Beloved Country." In I showed it to my wife and to my parents, and I said, I have to say this to the world. And they said, we know that if you have to say it, you will say it, but nothing will be the same after this. And so I wrote this piece. It was a very different time. I remember Times of India carried it. They reached out to me, and it was long before things went viral, but it went all over the world because it was the first, I think, call saying that this is not a riot. It's this. The state government was centrally responsible for what unfolded and the horrific violence on women and children. So it became a point when I said that there are many battles that you can fight within government. And my first lecture in the IS Academy, where I taught for 3 years, was always the right and the duty of a civil servant to dissent. I would say that all through your career, you're going to be told it's your duty to obey. That's not true. You are there to uphold the Constitution and justice for the most deprived. We are given this power as a trust on behalf of the most powerless. So I would often say that you're a servant first of the Constitution, second of the most vulnerable person in your jurisdiction, and only third of the elected government. And if the interests of the first two clash with the third, then you have to say no. And that is how I try to live my life. So there were many battles which I fought, and that's another story altogether. But there were battles within the four walls of the Constitution. I saw very clearly, and I'm sad to say that I saw it too clearly. I said, what is happening now, what has begun to unfold now, is breaking out of these four walls of the Constitution. And I cannot be a servant of a government which I think is breaking, is tearing apart what is most precious to me, which was the idea, the promise that we would be a country where it would not matter which god you worship, if you worship this god or Bhagwan or Allah, if you were of this caste or that language or that gender, you were an equal human being, an equal citizen with equal rights to be yourself, to worship, dress, eat, speak, love who you choose, and still be within an equal member of this. That was the India that I loved and I wanted to belong to. And I saw that India threatened. And for that battle, I realized I could not. So I wrote the article. It got published. It went around the world, and by and it was the 19th of March. So the violence had started on 28th February, and
this was early days.
This was just in the early days. So so that's why I went in the very heat of it into the camps. I then wrote this article because and then I put in my papers. That was 19th March.
Did you feel, that you wouldn't be able to work, or you felt that you would anyway be asked to now?
No, not at all. No, I felt that no, those kinds of battles, I there were earlier occasions where the right to information movement, I participated in as a serving civil servant. The Narmada agitation, I openly said I support. So that space, we still had that democratic space, and I would have done it. Could have held on this. No, I left because I felt that in order to defend the constitutional idea of India itself against a government which is tearing that apart, how can I be a servant of that government and fight that battle? So that is why I chose, and it was a very big decision.
So how did the family react to it? You have, you mentioned you have a wife, and your parents, your wife, your children.
I have a daughter who's
lovely. But there are responsibilities, and how did because you were just a few years away, from retirement, or also
no, I had about 13 years
left, but from pension,
and then pension I was getting.
Okay.
But even that took many years, but I am getting a pension. But at the age of 60, it was 13 years. I was 47 at that time. And then, of course, now people go on and on.
Yes, forever.
And my batchmates are in all sorts of... my one batchmate is Amitabh Kant, who's the Niti Aayog.
Yes,
one batchmate is the governor of the Reserve Bank, Shakti Das. One batchmate was the Chief Election Commissioner, etc. So there was a particular career path that I could have followed. But this was a different, this was something that I felt I needed to do. It was very difficult for my family because you have a lot of protections in the civil service. However, even if you are in the margins, you still have a good house to live in. You have a certain level of prestige and so on. And so giving that up like overnight, and my wife by her own choice is a homemaker, and she didn't bring in a salary. So I was actually, I leapt into something. I suddenly had no money, had no and we struggled through that. And it was my preoccupation at that time was not to just have money to keep my family going, but actually to do all the work that I felt needed to be done. So I started working among the victim survivors of Gujarat. I relocated there almost for a year. It was a very difficult time. Come back now to Delhi. My parents were getting old and I could not go then to any other city. And my wife's parents. So I said, if I'm living in Delhi, apart from fighting hate and violence, I must also, you oppose hate. What is it that demonstrates the alternative way of building a society? So I thought to myself, who's the last person, in a sense, in inverted commas, in this city? Gandhiji had said, when you are in doubt, think of the most vulnerable person you've ever known, and what are you doing? Is it of meaning to her or him? So I looked around and I said, it is homeless people. We see them every day, the children on the streets. And we know nothing about them. We don't care about them. And there's no public policy to deal with that. So my life became around, on the one hand, survivors of hate. On the other hand, I started working with homeless people. That's been 20 years now of that work. And a third was around social rights, the issues of hunger and homelessness. So there was a case in the Supreme Court on the right to food, that we have, every second child at that time was malnourished, 200 million people sleep hungry, and yet we have 60-70 million tons of grain in government warehouses, which means that if you actually 60 million tons means that if you put the bags in a line, you can go from the earth to the moon and go around 2 or 3 times. That much grain, and yet every
There's
child is
hunger.
malnourished. So the right to food. And the Supreme Court accepted that plea and appointed me and another person, Dr. N.C. Saxena, as commissioners with the powers of the Supreme Court to ensure that people don't go hungry. So these became the 3 sort of corners of my life, and so raising, making these happen, finding places, finding resources to.
And did you find an organization, or were you just
Yeah, so then I founded 2 organizations. One was called the Center for Equity Studies for disadvantaged people. So that's what the Center for Equity Studies. And then there was Aman Biradari, which was how do we build a society where there's communal harmony, caste equality, etc. So these are the 2.
Okay. So, you social activists are often called bleeding hearts. It's almost a derogatory term which is used. And yet you've spoken of the concept of radical love. Has that helped you? What do you mean by radical love? And has that helped you kind of move on when you're constantly challenged?
Absolutely. So the idea of radical love actually grew with me over time. The understanding of it. What is radical? See, I think India's greatest challenge today, and not just India, in many ways, people around the world, more and more people are choosing leaders who are teaching us to hate, who are encouraging us to hate. So whether it's a Donald Trump or Erdogan in Turkey or Bolsonaro and the so-called right-wing populists, what they're telling us is that your problem, you may be the dominant group, but your problems is from this minority. So the minority, so the dominant group, it's white Americans, are being oppressed by the immigrants who are coming in from Mexico for building a life, etc. So likewise in India, the upper caste Hindu dominates everything, business, politics, the media, and yet they become the oppressed. And it's the vulnerable groups, Dalit, Adivasi and Muslim, who are actually the oppressing group, this reversal. So it is, so it is in this, so what I would call the politics of hate. How do you counter it? So another thing that, again learning from Gandhi, and I keep bringing him back, because I think as the years pass, I feel we've got more and more to go back to him and learn. So one of the things he said was that you cannot fight hate with hate. Hate will only deepen. Just as if there's somebody has made your home dark, and you say, I'll fight it by making
his home dark,
your home dark, then only darkness is going to deepen. The only way to fight the darkness is, even if it's a storm, even if there's rain, is to light your lamp and go out. So how do you develop a politics and a social action which is founded on love? Now, I don't even like the word tolerance.
Yes.
We are tolerance. That means I'm putting up with you.
Yeah.
No, it's not that. It's how wonderful, how interesting.
The
We
other can be.
the other can be. You're enriching my life. I'm enriching your life. We're holding our hands together. When you're in trouble, I'm with you. So this idea that we should take care of each other is for me fundamental to a good society. But we're living in really strange times, difficult times, because this idea is seen as a very radical idea or a dangerous idea. And this word, the far right, uh, you know, stigmatizes me in many ways. Uh, but that they say I'm a dangerous person, and I
I've
say,
read that.
wow, what's so dangerous? Is this dangerous to say? You might be of a different religion, you might be of a different caste, you might look and worship and do things differently from me. But we are like, wow, we are just we are partners in this country of ours. So the idea of radical love is love that is based on enormous courage, where my love is so strong that in order to protect you, I'm willing to go to prison. I'm willing to go to give up my life. That's the idea. So when a mob gathers and lynches an unarmed man to death, that is not courage. That is cowardice. They might call it 56-inch chest. Hate doesn't require courage. It is the person who can leap into the middle of that and say, I won't let you do this.
That requires courage.
That is courage. That is radical love. Not going too far. I think was, of course, his most painful, but it was also the most beautiful time of his life. And I think the most beautiful time of our freedom struggle. And young people are not even being, we don't even talk to them about this. But think of a time when 1 million people slaughtered each other, like 1 million people. Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and more or less equally Muslims were killed and Hindus and Sikhs were killed on both sides of the border. The slaughter was unending. Train loads were coming full of corpses on both sides. 15 million people were displaced from their homes. A word again which I've heard often in this CA protests as well. हम बेवतन हो गए. मतलब 15 million people बेवतन हो गए उस वक्त. Now, in the middle of all of that, India could well have taken the decision that they, in inverted commas, have got their Pakistan, and we will be a country for our Hindus. And Gandhiji and Nehru and Patel and Maulana Azad and Dr. Ambedkar, who led the writing of our constitution, were very clear. No, India equally would belong to all who want to make it their own. And Muslims are equally part of this country. It was a very difficult decision to take, and Gandhiji lived for many ideas, but this was the idea he died for. And he gave up his life. He knew he was giving up his life for this. He was risking his life. People tell me, Mewat is close to Delhi, has seen
it's seen a lot of riots,
communal violence. And when I go there, the Mewatis, in fact, remember December 19th. And what happened December 19th? In fact, when I went, they said you have to spend a night here symbolically, which I did in a village called Ghaseda. And I said, what happened here? And they said that Gandhiji, there was a huge slaughter of the Mewatis in both Alwar and Bharatpur, where the kings were complicit in this slaughter. Mewatis felt that they had no option except to go to Pakistan. And Gandhiji went and he spent a night at Ghaseda, and he said, no, this is your country. And after that, they chose to stay on. And they celebrated. They have folk songs around, Baba Gandhi coming and doing this. So it is that kind of, when I talk about love, which is so profound, but also so courageous that I can give up my life for you.
But when you try to explain this concept, or talk to people, or do they understand it? Are they receptive to it?
There are two kinds of responses, and I found why there is so much of opposition from one side to this idea. This is what I'm saying, and this is what I'm consistently saying. Then I realized that there were 5 assassination attempts on Gandhiji's life. There was none on Nehru's. And I think, Nehru was deeply, profoundly secular, but his discourse was articulated in a certain kind of way. I think this discourse, which is built around a moral kind of claim that find our best selves within ourselves, is somehow panics,
Forces people to look inwards.
inwards.
That's scary.
I think, and it exposes what they really stand for. I mean, I often talk to young people and say, I'm not saying this is the right path or that is the right path. I'm just saying, be conscious about which path you're choosing. Do you want your children to grow up, or do you want to grow old in a country where there is embedded inequality, where some people are not treated as legitimate citizens, where people have to live with fear, and where there's hate? Or do you want a country where we all live our different lives? And so this idea of radical love, I did try to give it a concrete shape in response to the lynchings. 2017, if you recall, was when suddenly we don't even have a word for lynching in Hindi, because we hadn't seen it before. But this idea of people gathering around and beating an unarmed man to death began to grow and became like an epidemic. And the silence of the majority was what troubled me. And so I said, thought to myself, I said, what should we do? Learning the same, that I cannot also speak hatefully to them. So what do I do? So I made a call, and I said, we'll start a caravan of love. And we promised 4 things: that if anyone is lynched, we will go to their home, as you would go to a loved one, to your friend, to say, we share in your pain, and you're not alone. And
this is the Caravan
e Mohabbat. The second thing that we would tell them is that we seek forgiveness, because we all collectively responsible, and that our country has gone this way. The third is that we promise that we will be with you whatever happens, as you fight for justice, as you bring together the pieces of your life, and we will tell your story. And so there's a media component to it as well. So with this, we set off. I made a call within a month. It was again an interesting group of people, many of whom I didn't know at all, gathered together. There were filmmakers, writers, students, trainee priests, all sorts of people gathered. We set out on a 1-month journey initially. It was September, and we started off in Assam and finished in Porbandar, Gandhiji's birthplace.
And how would you travel?
So we would travel. We took a bus for a large part of so it was a yatra.
Yeah, that's and where would you stay? In people's homes?
Yeah, people's homes and so on. So Ghasera, I spoke about earlier, Mewat. When we said we're going through Mewat, they said you have to spend, the Caravan e Mohabbat has to actually spend a night at Ghasera. And much of it was very very basic, but it was it meant so much to the people that we went with, that we realized that we will not stop this.
So how did people?
So there, we've done 35 journeys now, and
across the country,
wherever there is lynching, we try to go. It's now become harder and harder because the government has charged me with all sorts of crimes that no one is willing to fund. So now it's literally, friends send money every month, and somebody sends money, because we are giving pensions to at least 100 widows.
Who's you are giving?
We are giving, and people are, and everything else can stop, but this will not stop. And the legal cases, we are fighting for them, with them, and we're trying to do some research and writing around this as well, about the hate. So that everything else, if I had to let go, but this I won't, because this is the central attack on our constitution, is the attack on our minorities. So we've been doing this, and
You've faced a lot of hardships. You're now, like you just mentioned, your funding has been stopped, and there are significant challenges you've encountered. How do you navigate them personally, and how do you remain optimistic in the face of all that? And wanting to go to get up in the morning and do spread some more love and make some more effort the next day.
Okay, let me start with the question of optimism. There's a young man called Asif Iqbal Tanha. He was also put in prison under UAPA. And along with Natasha Narwal and Devangana, he got bail at some point. When he came out of prison, and I was very struck because he knew the media would be, he managed to get that mask, but on the mask he said no CA, no NRC. And I felt it was a very brave, he was saying, you've sent me out of jail, but my battle is still there. So he came out. And so I decided to meet him and talk to him. And I had a lovely conversation with him, actually. He comes from he's only studied in a madrasa. This was in Delhi. He finally came, where he started struggling. He's got an education now from Jamia. And very brave, thoughtful young man. So at one point I said, because he's been in prison and so much is happening with India's Muslims, how do you feel? Do you feel hope? So he gave me a reply in Urdu. He said, Mayusi kufr hai, which literally means despair is blasphemy. And it's again something that stays with me, because if we despair, that means ab kuch nahi ho sakta, then I won't do anything. So I don't do anything. But if you say in the worst of times things can get better, then I have to do something. So hope is something that it's very hard at times to hold on to. The difficulties have been, the stopping of funding, etc., is actually a small part actually of what, but much more than that, what they've done is I'm being charged and investigated for a range of crimes, from supporting terror to money laundering to I don't know what all. If as a Hindu one has a second life, all the crimes that I'm charged with, I can spend this life and the next all in prison. And it's just, and it's bizarre. They come into raids, very dramatic raids into your home with, police persons outside and television cameras, and they call you for interrogations where you're put into a small room like a criminal and interrogated for 8 hours. And, there's humiliation. They've investigated every transaction I've done in banks for 15 years. And they're calling in my family and so on. So many things. And along with the family, which is also family to me, are my colleagues who work with me, people part of this journey. They are being called, they are being summoned, they're being threatened. And with the funding ending, a lot of people's lives are linked to mine. So, for instance, the schools for homeless children or shelters for homeless adults. Now, that requires money, and if the foundation just stops. So, I've negotiated with great difficulty finding somebody else to take it over, that you love so much that you're willing to leave the person. I mean, that's the real love. So I've done all of that. So that has been a preoccupation, trying to protect the staff through all of it. And thirdly is that whatever you do, you're not going to silence, you're not going to crush my conscience, you're not going to crush my voice, and you won't stop my work. and so struggling to do that with all of that. So I look. I mean, the possibility of being sent to prison, and I have no illusions. That if I'm sent to prison at some point, some 1,000 people from around the world will write a letter, and we might have a meeting somewhere in press club or somewhere, and then everybody goes on with their life. And so I'm conscious of that. So I've tried to do what I can to secure my family a little bit, to secure my colleagues at work, imagining, we had this very big dramatic raid by the ED, and a year later my colleagues in the office said, we want to observe this date. So I said, sure. They said, we want to celebrate it. So I smiled and I said, fine. So they said, hum log khana wana banayenge, and but I asked them, why do you want to celebrate? And they said 3 things, and this is from them. They said, A, we know that we are being attacked because you're speaking about love, and so we should celebrate. B, they've put the entire machinery. At one point I did say this, when it got too much, I just said that 1% of what you're doing to investigate me, I wish you'd do it with Adani. The country would be much better. so that they've done all of this, but they've not yet found something. At some point they might, which they can. And the third is, we are not broken yet. So that's 3 reasons to celebrate. So it's hard, but, and for the family, of course, I mean, there's no illusions that all of this is going to be, has been easy or will be easy. But there are times when it's important to do this, where my own suffering is very small compared to what ordinary people who are facing India's, my Muslim brothers and sisters, for instance, Dalits, working poor. I think in all of that, one has to see one's difficulties as a tiny fraction of all this.
Like you said, family, colleagues, a lot of people dependent on you, are looking at you for strength and some to show them some direction. Who do you look at? Where, how do you, what continues to drive your passion for social justice?
It happened to be my birthday yesterday. And
happy birthday.
Thank you. So I was saying, I just feel younger every year. I was just joking with my colleagues at office, and they said that we think of you as the youngest person in this office. I said yes, and then somebody quoted I think कहीं की शायरी है कि मेरी इतनी जिम्मेदारियां हैं कि मुझे बूढ़े होने का वक्त ही नहीं मिला. I have so many responsibilities that I haven't had the time to get old. So I said yes, and I realized, I thought about it. I said, I have so many responsibilities which I've chosen that I also haven't had the time to worry about what's going to happen to me. I've not had the time, and I'm happy. I think that's perhaps what's kept me going, because somebody saying, lag raha hai ki they might put you into prison. I said, kar rahe hain, let's get on with what are we doing, etc. So when they don't see even a trace of anxiety on my part, I think it gives strength to the others, including to my family and my larger family of friends and colleagues. It's not particularly heroic. I want to underline that. It's not particularly heroic, and I'm saying this because I still have the benefit of a very large amount of social capital. I mean, I have people who believe in me, people who have a voice which is heard in India and around the world. So I am protected to a significant degree. There are people who are fighting my kind of battle who don't even have this protection. So I shouldn't overstate any heroism in what I'm doing. I'm just doing what I have to do.
But the responsibilities drive you.
Yeah, it's a responsibility I've chosen. It's a duty. Tagore had a poem He said, I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life is duty. I acted and behold, duty was joy. So in all of this, I'm joyful. Yes.
To affect any kind of social change, you have to deal a lot with policymakers, and they are exactly the ones you have to also challenge to break the status quo. So how do you strike the balance so you can actually achieve something?
Yeah, I went through two phases. One was that during the last government, I was invited to join the National Advisory Council. A lot has been said, and as a controversial body, etc. I would like to underline that every Prime Minister and every President around the world has advisory groups. And this was just an advisory group with a very clear mandate to please advise the government what it should do for poor and marginalized groups. And I think it was great that they had it. And it is not true that our recommendations went through smoothly. Once we made a recommendation, it went to the government, and then the government dealt with it, and it accepted some of it. It didn't accept a lot of it as well. But that was an interesting experience where I was suddenly able to participate at decision making at the highest level possible. Not decision making, but at least policy recommendations at the highest level. What I took with me was this idea that what we've lost very much in the last 10 years. Now we've suddenly become हम लोग एक तरह से प्रजा बन गए हैं. ऊपर से राजा हमें दान दे रहा है. After all, for instance, the Food Security Act was the one that said you'll get so many grains, but nobody put Dr. Manmohan Singh's picture on every bag of grains saying कि उनकी दया से आपको ये मिल रहा है. This was your right as a citizen. And I think that was our biggest accomplishment, was the idea of looking at people who are equal citizens, are living very difficult lives. The economic model is not throwing out jobs. It's resulting in vast inequalities. We have a old history of caste inequalities. We have this new rise of anti-religious sort of hatred. In the middle of it, those who are targeted at the bottom, what can make life better? So it was a great period, and you're absolutely right. I felt that we're living through a time where a large part of privileged society does not believe that the state should be a welfare state. There's no doubt, including within the Congress party, which was supposed to be steering this. I didn't find a great deal of consensus on this question. Free market should function, we should get investment from abroad and so on. We are saying, think of another kind of economic model where everybody has some surplus money at the very bottom. After all, they will spend that surplus money in local markets.
Yes, that was the basic idea.
So instead of trickle down, we are saying bubble up development. And there's a whole plan around this. It was difficult, but it was not impossible. I think this is a time for what I call radical new imaginations for our future. Radical new imaginations, because when the Berlin Wall fell, I see actually 3 demolitions. The Berlin Wall fell, and it became as if the idea of justice and equality are not feasible at all. That was how it was interpreted. The Babri Masjid fell, and the idea of secular India sort of crumbled to some degree, and then the World Trade Center in New York fell, and this global war on terror stigmatizing a particular community globally. So it is in that rubble, I feel, in these 3 demolitions, young people, unlike when I was growing up in college, young people no longer seem to be brought up to believe that a better world is possible, that justice, equality is possible. So the challenge is radical new imaginations. And I think that this idea of universal social rights, that you might let markets function, but let there be a floor of human dignity below which no one can fall, that no child will sleep hungry, no child will die because they can't afford health care, no old person will have to work till her last day because she doesn't get a pension. I mean, there's some basic things like this. Every mother should have enough maternity sort of benefits that she can take care of her child and her health. Some basic things. It would not cost the country more than about 10% of GDP, and we need to tax our rich. We need to provide the resources for it, and we need to ensure that life is better for all our people. That's what I believe in, and that is an extension of the idea of radical love again.
But you've been on both sides of the table, an administrator and an activist. How does the insight of the former help the work of the latter?
Now, Yasmin, I used to, I said I was at the Mussoorie Academy. One of the other things I used to tell my trainees was that we tend to draw a line like this, saying on this side is government, which is me and my people, and on this side is people outside, so they are the adversary. I said, let us draw the line like this, in a different way, that on one side are people who believe in justice and equality. They can be in government and they can be outside, and on the other side are people who are opposed to these ideas, and they can be in government and outside. So my life ideologically, I was just the same person, and I've remained. Nothing really has changed. Those early years before I joined the IS and in the years I spent there, I think have taught me so much. But through all of those years, I negotiated with exactly the same principles in life. I mean, what I saw happening in riots has taught me many things. For instance, that no riot, so-called riot, can go on for even more than a few hours unless the state wants it to. And I can, as a lay person, you might believe this, but you may not be sure. But I've seen it. I've handled riots. I know that even the biggest.
As an administrator,
I know that. So that learning has deepened my social action, in a sense. So when Delhi in 2020 saw violence, I mean, it was a tiny skirmish by any standards in one corner of the national capital, where the Home Ministry, the national government is located, where the armed forces, all the armed forces are located, all the headquarters of the paramilitary are. If they wished, it was not a matter of even 3 or 4 hours if they wanted to win.
It.
The fact that it went on for three days, I realized how big a crime it is. When the Sikh riots went on for 4 days, when Gujarat went on for weeks and weeks, how big a crime against humanity that is, and how the public officials concerned are culpable, I understand better because I've been on both sides.
How has your activism evolved over time? Did you, was there a moment you felt, okay, now what I'm saying is making a difference. My voice is being heard both by people and, by people who can, by the government, or people who can make a difference. Did you ever feel that, okay, now I'm being heard because of, the work I've done?
Yes, when the government changed, suddenly a voice that was heard, but in those years, it wasn't as if it was uncritically heard, because I do think there's a what I would call a neoliberal consensus and a majoritarian consensus across political parties. In simple words, there is a very wide belief that free markets and a Hindu majoritarian kind of ethos is how this country should be run, and therefore, even with the earlier government, every step of it was was a struggle against both the free market versus welfare and majoritarianism versus a secular notion of minority rights being equal to majority rights. So it was a struggle there, but it was at least it was a more respectful kind of engagement and struggle. I think the last 10 years, many things have happened. It's much harder because these voices, people who say this now are called urban naxals, jihadi sympathizers, and such like, or promoting Christian conversions, and so all of those allegations. So what I feel is that public debate and discourse, it's a completely legitimate discourse. Are markets better, or should we go for a welfare state? Of course, we should have a debate around it, and the debate should be respectful, evidence-based, etc. Now there's no space for debate.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The conversations are
The
you're unable to have
just stopped.
conversations.
So all you do is abuse and stigmatize those who don't agree with you. And again, this is global. I mean, how does Donald Trump talk about people who disagree with him? Everyone is called names and abuses of the worst kind. When, say, America's sort of finest actress Meryl Streep, she had made some statement about just something to this effect, that let us live together respectfully, etc. Donald Trump responds by saying, "Oh, she's a highly useless, overrated actress." That's not the way you respond to
attacks are very personal.
So here everything is very personal. So there is no space for these discussions. So these last 10 years, policy discussions have become much harder because, and at moments like, especially in the lockdown, it was horrible when we were seeing, you cannot, in a country where 9 out of 10 workers are informal workers, you suddenly, so the Prime Minister at 3.5 hours notice says everything is going to be locked down. It's the largest lockdown of an economy in human history anywhere in the world. And work from home, keep social distance. Now, if 9 out of 10 workers are informal workers, what will they eat tomorrow?
Yeah, the daily wage earners.
The daily wage earners, which is the large majority of our people. So clearly the government wasn't even thinking about them. Keep social distance. 6 out of 10 Indians live in one room or less. How are they going to keep distance? So step by step, we were, wash your hands regularly. When I forget the exact figures, people don't have running water, etc., etc. So I've written about the pandemic. I've said that it was very clear that some lives are important, like people like you and
not
me,
all.
but a large majority are completely dispensable. Not only are they, we don't care about what happens to them. So in these times, so I went to the Supreme Court with a few friends, and we said, if workers in the formal sector are getting their salaries at home, the government owes it to give equivalent of minimum wages to every family. And we calculated, along with some economists, that it won't cost more than 3% of GDP. Now, things like this are not discourses that we can sit across the table and have. I mean, when Dr. Manmohan Singh was there, we could actually sit across the table. He would disagree. He was a very strong believer in markets, but he was an extremely thoughtful and courteous person. We would have a discussion. Here, there's no place to have that discussion. So you go to the Supreme Court. The government doesn't listen, and the consequences of it was of huge suffering, but also the economy cracked up. I mean, if they had just done this, they wouldn't have had to migrate. The economy wouldn't have had to collapse. So the humane way of public policy was also the sensible way. Yet there's no place for that kind of discourse, and so the crushing of alternative voices anyone realizes that if you don't have, none of us, I don't know everything, and I could be wrong on many things. So I'll state my view and you state yours, and we'll decide between ourselves, and other people will listen to both of us and choose a way. But if you say only one voice is allowed,
my way or the highway.
It's hugely destructive of even the possibility of change. So policy making, intervening in policy in this environment has become very difficult.
Yeah, conversations and
there are no conversations at all, and you are stigmatized rather than. So to talk about this, you're an urban naxal. As a matter of detail, I'm really opposed to all violence, including Maoist violence. But who's even
listening?
Who's even listening
to what, and even understanding what an urban naxal or what a naxal really means, except that using it as a derogatory.
Of course, like the Maoist, I also believe in a more equal society. We may differ on how to get there. That's also a conversation. But
true. Today the world is very cynical and data driven. Does one need to experience a huge societal or community impact or grand success to think that to continue the fight for social and civil rights? And what would that mean for you, for somebody standing up for the voiceless? What are the indicators that okay, your work and your advocacy, there has been some success to it?
Just briefly about data, another thing that this government has done is just stop publishing data. We just don't. How many jobs have actually been, at least during the last regime, we were able to say it was a period of very low job creation because we had data and we could challenge the government and the government would be able to respond. Now we don't have data. We just can speculate that job growth has even reduced. So firstly, of course, we need data. We need evidence. But I think that I travel around the world. The world seems to be in a period of enormous tumult. Inequality has grown to huge levels. India, of course, leads in inequality. A recent report said that we are much more unequal than colonial India, and that's really something. The top 1% owns 40% of the country's wealth. It's greater than almost anywhere in the world. So but inequality is a crisis. Jobs are not happening. The chances that your neighbor will not look like you, worship like you, talk your language has grown. How do we deal with people who are different with us? And the questions of the climate. All of these are crises. And I don't see it getting resolved quickly. It's going to be a longish battle. But people in our generation, I'm getting older, though I keep saying every birthday is making me younger. But I think young people will really have to fight a long battle to decide what kind of future they want for their children, and that it really boils down to that in all of these questions. The three that I said. How do you want this kind of inequality and joblessness, etc.? Do you want where we are suspicious of people who are different from us and resentful of them? Do you want to keep going with our consumption and putting the planet at risk, or do we want a difference? I think that there was a recent survey which said that 86% Indians said they want a dictatorship. It's the highest in the world. Recent survey. Now, if this is what we choose, then this is what we choose. This is where we will get to.
We will get, yeah.
So I believe that the kind of discourse that I try, very ineffectually maybe, but this discourse is important because we need to say there is a different way of dealing with our world.
We were talking of Caravan Mohabbat earlier, and how you reach out to affected communities. How do you win their trust? Everybody doesn't know you. You're an outsider. How do you keep them from feeling that you are parachuting into their situation and you are now deciding to speak up for them?
It didn't take an effort because I think people understand. People understand because each
people
time
understand intention and
intention very much so. You cry with them. Actually, आपके आंखों में हमारे दर्द के लिए हमने आंसू देखे. This is people have said. So I don't think that. I think it is to be worthy of the trust is the bigger challenge. It's not getting the trust which has been a challenge at all. We need to be worthy of it.
And how do you ensure that their voices are respected and heard when they...
See, everything is about their aspirations. I mean, not many of them don't want to fight legal cases, for instance. We don't fight them, but we try to work with them in terms of what they want in their lives. Being worthy of the trust is precisely this. For instance, the third promise that I spoke about when we go in the Caravan was that we will be with you as you rebuild your life and fight for justice. Now, suddenly all resources collapsed. And I said, everything else I can hand over to other people and hope it will carry on. This is so difficult in this environment that we'll have to do it ourselves. But I don't have money for it. But friends keep sending, literally pensioners are sending 5,000 rupees, 10,000 rupees a month. Somebody's sending something. The universe is conspiring in a sense. That, and I've said this over and over again, this is a promise I didn't make it for myself. I made it for what the state should have done, but at least what society must do.
That's collective responsibility.
Exactly.
You said Caravan Mohabbat has a media component also, and so you understand art, poetry, literature. And earlier you mentioned that films and poetry would talk about the rural and urban poor, but now there's a gully boy and maybe there's a 12th fail, and even they are dealing with aspiration and urban this thing. So you think the poor are completely being wiped out from mainstream media?
It's a great question. When you look back on the films of the 50s and 60s, I'm a great film lover, by the way. So that's my secret love on the side. I also write about films and so. So in the 50s and 60s, you made out a different kind of consciousness. On the one hand, there were films about homeless people. They may have been glamorized, but you had Shri 420, which was a lot about people on footpaths. You had Do Bigha Zameen about and Mother India, about rural poverty and oppression. You had and you had also the Muslim consistently being depicted as the kind Rahim Chacha was sort of almost like a cliche in and the transformation and popular cinema in India. I think no people in the world have so much of a kinship with their cinema as we do. I mean, it's our life.
It's part of our it's part of us.
It's so much part of us. So films may not be realistic by any standard, but they are realistic depiction of popular consciousness, and they also then reinforce that popular consciousness. Somewhere along the 80s, 90s, the Muslims suddenly started becoming
the villain and the terrorist.
The terrorist, etc. And to show terror and somebody doing the namaz sort of simultaneously gives the message that Islam is teaching you to. It's not that it is a distortion. I mean, to say Hindutva is Hinduism is not true. Hinduism is a very, very different set of beliefs than what Hindutva is telling us. Similarly, Islamic terrorism is very different from Islam, which is actually a religion of both peace and equality. So, but films have now communicated. Now, popular thinking is equating Islam with terror and violence, and with this whole notion that these kings were Muslim rulers came and they oppressed and they broke down temples and so on. So cinema, I think, must take responsibility for engaging with popular consciousness in a very negative way at this time. So I look at my grandson. I have a lovely grandson who's about 5 years old now, and I see that I was very lucky when I grew up, because although we are a partition family, I never heard hatred and bigotry. In my entire childhood, I didn't hear it from my parents. I didn't hear it from the elite boarding schools that I studied in. I didn't see it in my cinema. I didn't hear it from my leaders. You know, my little grandson is hearing it everywhere. Hearing it from parts of the extended family. He's hearing it, seeing it on social media. He watches television and he sees his prime minister speaking in a certain kind of way. He'll hear it more and more from his class fellows in school, etc. So we, somebody has to break this. A lot of children are learning hate from their parents. They're learning hate. Then the school should make a difference. But then they're learning hate in schools. So then popular culture should make a difference. But then they're learning hate from there also. From there as well.
But when we were, as you said, when through the period of transition independence, films actually played a very crucial role. So we had, you could. It was the only place where you could reach the top of the industry irrespective of what your surname was. And in a film, a person could go to a Mander and whether irrespective of his or her religion, or go to a dargah irrespective, and or to a church, and all problems would just would disappear with that one supreme power who was looking after. And in fact, the film industry was frankly known for it. It is a very cosmopolitan and cohesive place. Unfortunately, we are losing that.
Sometimes when I travel around the world, I sometimes think, and who is a quintessential Indian, who represents what is best in our civilizational history, and I would say it is this woman who comes out of a slum house. She walks down the road. She sees a masjid and a dargah, and she bows her head.
To either, as she's walking towards.
And she walks further. She sees a church and she bows her head. And she sees a temple and she bows her head. There's no country in the world which has this. And this we must hold on to.
Yeah, that's beautiful. True. And we have almost every gully, every mohalla at least has a mandir, masjid, gurdwara, the same, because that's how we were, that's how the nation was built.
And that's till quite recently, the armed forces. I mean, there are places in the front where you have a single man and a single room. The guy has to be a Maulvi someday on Friday, and then he becomes a Pandit on Tuesday, and he becomes a priest on Sunday. I think that's absolutely fabulous. It's the same person. And people accepted it. That is India.
There is, it's now quite established that, primary caregivers who are working with victims of trauma have to get affected, and they get traumatized themselves, and they have to be taken care of. How do you emotionally cope with while you are listening to all these stories and working with people who've gone through enormous trauma?
There's one period in my life where my wife tells me that I did display signs of trauma, and that was after the Gujarat massacre. The kind of cruelty against children and women that I heard of, she said I would wake up with nightmares and so on. But by and large, as far as myself is concerned, I think it is the recognition that if I am feeling traumatized, just listening to a story, what happens to the person who's living that story? And how can I privilege my trauma over her trauma? It's not just say hunger. One of the conversations that I'll never forget till my last day was with a group of Musahar women who actually said, what is the most difficult lesson we have to teach our children? I said, what is it? And they said, it's a lesson of how to sleep hungry. To tell your child that whatever I can do, there'll be some nights every month when I can't give you food. And when they were speaking, I was thinking about my own daughter, and I was saying, how would I have looked at life if I had to tell her this? And so, but it's important for me to hear that. It's important for me to absorb that, and that should drive me to say that, no, let me try for an arrangement where no mother has to ever teach that lesson to her child. So we can't privilege our trauma over the trauma of those who actually live those lives and can't escape them.
You know, you've mentioned young people a lot, as you were talking, and we definitely need more young people to join politics or social activism, because the youth have this idealism and, you know, this deeper conviction and drive to fight. But, you know, how would you, what advice would you give individuals who want to join or are passionate but may feel overwhelmed about, you know, how to get into activism or in the political space to make a difference?
I think that we are passing through times where everybody is participating, even by your silence. And Martin Luther King somewhere said that in the end, I won't remember the words of my enemies. I'll remember the silence of my friends. And so we are participating. You know, every young person, every older person is participating because we're being forced to make a choice. In your family WhatsApp group, and somebody says something hateful, in your office group, and all of us have those experiences. But many young people will say, how are you expecting us to be heroic, and, you know, how can I risk my future, etc. So there can be many ethical systems, but let me talk about something that Prophet Muhammad said. He said, what is your duty when you confront great suffering and injustice? So he said, at the very least, respond from your heart, which means feel badly about it. Dard to mehsoos ho. Then he said, some among us will go further and respond with our tongue, which means we'll speak out against it. The best among us, which will be a small number, will be what you were calling the activist, which is those who will act against it. My expectation from young people is not that all of them will either speak out from the tongue or from the hands, with their hands, but every single person should respond from their hearts. मतलब दर्द आप महसूस करें कि हाथरस में एक दलित बच्ची का गैंग रेप होता है, तो आपको लगे कि मेरी बेटी के साथ हुआ है, या पहलू खान के पीठ पे कोई चाबुक मारे तो मुझे लगे कि मेरे पीठ पे दर्द उठ रहा है. You know, it is that idea which is what we call fraternity and bandhuta in our constitution. Actually, that's the idea. So my advice to young people is that go as far as you can, but every one of us must at least respond from your heart, feel the pain of the other. You know what happened, say, with Bilkis Banu, and contrasted what happened with Nirbhay. You know, Nirbhay, we felt, you know, people by and large felt that pain, and it was a beautiful moment in our public life because people felt the pain of somebody they didn't know, but they were mourning when she died. I was sitting that day on Jantar Mantar, and I was seeing young people who were, you know, crying as if
they've lost someone.
They've lost someone of their own. That's what I'm saying. Why did we not feel this with Bilkis Banu, who, you know, her story is so horrifying. That imagine that, you know, you're being driven out of your village with your family, the 20 of them, and your own people you call bhaiya and chacha and so on, catch you. They strip the women naked. They rape in the presence of the other. They're raping her mother. They're raping her sister and sister-in-law. They rape her. They take her small baby and smash her against a rock. Now that should horrify us. And then you're letting, on the 75th anniversary of independence, we are letting them free. Why did we not feel the same outrage as we did with Nirbhay? So I think, so my advice, sorry, that's a long, my advice to young people is just 2 words: be kind. Baki sab, just feel badly when you see a homeless person, you see somebody who's being discriminated against, you see someone who's in prison for no fault. Just be kind. बाकी सब संभल जाएगा.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mander. It was lovely talking to you about your journey, and thank you so much for being so candid and so inspiring and just being yourself with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was a lovely conversation. Thank you, Yasmin.
Thank you, Dr. Mander. It was lovely talking to you about your journey and your work today. Thank you for being so candid, just being yourself, and inspiring us towards compassion and care. With a Delhi Love, we speak to people from Delhi who have stories to share, stories of those who are invested in the city. We help build communities and open conversations that make Delhi more accessible, welcoming, and adventurous. Join us next time as we explore Delhi's hidden gems, people, places, and stories on Delhi Love, Ishq, Mohabbat, Pyar. I'm Yasmin Kidwai. Until next time.